Welcome everyone to another episode of Mondays with Mundy, and that's me, Jim Mundy, the historian for the Union League Legacy Foundation. I also happen to be the art curator, and so we're beginning a new video series called Jim's Picks. So I get to go around the art collection and pick my favorite paintings and my favorite artists. And today we're starting with my favorite non-living portrait artist in the collection named Robert Vonnoh, V-O-N-N-O-H. Robert Vonnoh was born in Boston in 1858. His father died during the American Civil War, so his mother raised Robert in Boston. Until at the age of 15 in 1878, Robert went to work for a lithographic company, which gave him time to study drawing and art at night at the Boston Free School of Drawing. And over the next several years, Vonnoh would continue his evening art studies while he worked during the day. But then in 1881, he got a little courageous and he applied to the Académie Julienne in Paris, at which he was accepted. And the Académie was probably the second most prestigious and respected art school in all of France, after only l'École des Beaux-Arts in Paris. And it didn't take long for Vonnoh to discover that he was a good portrait artist, because in just 2 years, in 1883, his first portrait was accepted for exhibition at the Paris Salon, the annual exhibit of all the up-and-coming artists in Paris. And it's the equivalent perhaps of being nominated for an Academy Award, because it cements you in that pantheon of the greater stars in the art world at this point in time. But it didn't take long for Vonnoh to get recognized back in Boston either, because in 1885 he was hired as an instructor at the Boston Museum of Fine Arts. But that didn't last long either, because in 1886, Vonnoh, getting the itch to go back to France, went to France, and between 1887 and 1891, he was part of an artist colony about 50 miles south of Paris called Grèze-sur-Loire, and forgive my French pronunciation on that. But there he met other American, British, Irish, and Scandinavian artists. And at this point, Impressionism is taking hold of the art scene in France, and which would spread, of course, around the world itself. And Vonnoh would get the Impressionist bug. And his portraiture and now his landscape art would all become very reflective of this new school in art, and it would embrace bright, unpigmented paint colors, and it would, which would affect, of course, the way that brightness and light were reflected in the painting or the portrait itself. And so in 1891, Vonnoh, with his reputation firmly cemented now as one of the leading Impressionist artists in America, was persuaded to come to Philadelphia, where he became an instructor at the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts in figure and portrait painting. And he would stay there until 1896. But in those 5 years, he would influence some of the greatest artists coming out of Philadelphia and coming out of PAFA itself. Think of the New Hope School in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, that produced those great those landscape impressionists. So think of Daniel Garber, Edward Redfield, Walter Schofield, right? But also think of another school that was forming post-impressionist, and that is the school, the realism school, which is kind of paralleling in a parallel universe at the same time. So think of the Ashcan school. Think of Robert Henri, John Sloan, and William Glackens, okay, who are all students of Vonnoh's at the Academy itself as well. So Vonnoh became not only a great artist, but also a great teacher for American artists as well. After 1896, Vonnoh wouldn't teach again, but rather he would maintain studios in New York and Chicago, and he would make intermittent trips back and forth to France until he died in 1933. But I think Vonnoh's influence in Philadelphia, and the art world in Philadelphia, and the art world in general, though, are firmly cemented in art history. So if you look over my shoulder, you're going to see one of 5 Robert Vonnoh portraits in the League's collection. And over my shoulder, you see Christopher Stuart Patterson. Patterson was born in Philadelphia in 1842. His father, Joseph Patterson, was one of the most prominent 19th century bankers in a century in Philadelphia that produced some of the greatest bankers in American history. Christopher Stuart Patterson graduated from the University of Pennsylvania in 1860, but the Civil War quickly followed, and in early 1863 he joined the Landis 1st Battery, part of the Philadelphia Light Artillery. And he was wounded in the Battle of Gettysburg, or rather I should say it's a in the Gettysburg campaign, closer to Carlisle, Pennsylvania, to the west of Gettysburg itself. But he was severely wounded and was very fortunate to survive his wounds. He came back to Philadelphia, finished his studies at Penn, and graduated in 1865 and joined the Philadelphia Bar Association that same year. The next 20 years, he would practice law in Philadelphia, but also become a banker himself with the Western Savings Fund Society. So he had a foot in both of those two worlds. And then in 1887, he was hired by the University of Pennsylvania Law School to become a teacher. And specifically, he would teach real estate, conveyance, and most importantly, constitutional law. And he would become one of America's foremost constitutional scholars. He held the chair in constitutional law at Penn for 5 years, and which certainly cemented his reputation in that field in the country. He would serve as an instructor at Penn until 1896, but between 1890 and 1896, he was also dean of the law school at the University of Pennsylvania itself. But by 1896, he had given up the practice of law itself and would devote himself to his other professions, specifically banking. But in 1892, Patterson joined the Union League, and 3 years later, in 1895, he joined the board of directors of the Pennsylvania Railroad, based here in Philadelphia, which was then the largest corporation in America, one of the most, if not the world, and certainly one of the most important companies of its kind anywhere. And he would stay a director of the Pennsylvania Railroad until 1924. All right. So he became one of the great financial leaders of Philadelphia in his lifetime. And after joining the Union League in 1892, in just 5 years' time, he became president in 1897 and served in 1898. And it was in 1897 that President William McKinley nominated Patterson to be a member of the National Monetary Commission, which had the responsibility for setting currency rates, if you will. That is, so it's pre-Federal Reserve. So the Monetary Commission made sure that currency rates didn't fluctuate to the point where they would harm the economy. And after 1898, actually, at the Indianapolis Commission meeting, Patterson gave a major presentation because in January of 1898, the League actually published a pamphlet of his that he co-authored on fluctuating currency rates. So he was now also an expert in American currency as well. So Patterson was quite an established man. But personally, I love the style. I mean, I really love, I'm not a big fan of, if you will, what we call, I guess, realistic portrait painting or photorealism. I don't mind a little bit of, fuzziness around the edges, if you will. And so if you look at the Vonnoh portrait, and I hope you come into the founder's room where we're standing right now and take a look at it, you'll see that it's a very very mellow and soft complexion in Patterson's face. And I love that white beard, especially when you contrast it to that bright red vermilion tie. Geez, it's almost Christmas. Think of Santa Claus perhaps in a way, and I think Mr. Patterson would appreciate the humor in that. And if you do look closely, you'll see that his waistcoat is also flecked with red spots all over it to give it some texture and color as well. So it's just a wonderful painting all the way around. So come down to the collection, take your time, just walk around the building, look at some of the paintings, and let me know if you have any picks of your own that you think that you like, perhaps even more than I do. But in the meantime, I get to pick. So I hope you enjoy our first Jim's Pick. And if you have any information you want to send me or any questions about anything that I've said, email me at mundyj@unionleague.org. Would love to hear from you. And in the meantime, it's almost Christmas. Hanukkah, I think, is just about ending. Next is Christmas. So happy holidays, everybody. Stay safe and stay well, and we'll see you next time around. Thanks for joining us.